This is Kevin Rigsbee, interviewing for the Greenhills Historical Society. Could you tell us your name?
Dan Rolfes.
All right. And Mr. Rolfes, when did you move to Greenhills?
Well, I came from the hospital to Greenhills in 1943. July, later part of July 1943.
Do you know why your family first moved?
Well, I heard a lot of stories. We were one of the original families, I believe. We had one of those original numbers that you had to have. I'm not sure about this. One of my sisters suggested that our number was in the 30s. I'm sure you're familiar with the process that they went through back then. And so our family moved in there I think in 1937. I'm not sure the month. So I had two sisters by then. One had just been born in 37. And then I was the fourth of 5 children. So I was born in 43. So your question was, why did my parents move there?
Yes.
I believe they looked at that as some type of utopia. That this was an opportunity was afforded to them by being picked to live there, that it was kind of a dream. They were relatively young. They had, well, I guess Mom was probably pregnant with her second child by that time, and they were just renting places in Corryville or someplace like that, and they liked the idea of moving out of the city into this community. So I think they viewed it as a real opportunity.
What was the house you lived in Greenhills like?
Actually, our family lived in 3 houses in Greenhills. We moved in what is called C Block on Cromwell, I think it was. Actually, I think it was 27. And then they moved to A Block. I don't know if it was Andover or Alcott or one of those, to 17. And then they moved to Burnham Street, 7 Burnham Street. And I think they were in Burnham Street by the time. Well, that would be the first house I would remember. I don't know exactly when they moved in there, but that's the only house I remember in Greenhills is on Burnham Street, because we called B Block. So it was one of the more. It was a detached house. The next door neighbor, we were attached by our garages. And it was, that probably was considered at that time one of the nicer houses in Greenhills. A lot of them were multifamily type of arrangement, townhouse, that kind of thing. And these were the single family homes.
How many rooms were there in that house?
There were 4 bedrooms, and there was a bath and a half when we moved in. Later, Dad put a bath down in the basement. But that was much later. You know, back in those days, you weren't allowed to alter anything. And you had to keep your property just a certain way. had to pay so many dollars a month into the co-op that you could only pull back out to paint the exterior of your house or paint the interior of the house. It was a very unique place. You were allowed to paint the interior, but you were not allowed to pick the color. The color was already picked for you, as was the exterior. Our house was deemed to be green trim, I think. So that's the only color that my dad was allowed to paint it. That trim was that green color when it needed. And then on the inside, you could only paint the walls upon their permission, number one, and this kind of a buff color is the only color that you were allowed to have in the house.
I'm sorry, would you give me 1 moment? I just wanted this backup audio real fast.
Good.
We've had there have been a couple of times when the sound's cut out on a few earlier interviews. I just wanted to make sure to set up something just to make sure we have that, just in case. Okay. Now, when you were growing up on Greenhills, what activities did you participate in?
Well, everybody went to the swimming pool. There was a community swimming pool. That was a huge swimming pool for those days and our circumstances. And other than that, I spent most of my time in the woods. Greenhills was surrounded by a green belt, and we happened to live. Our house backed into this green belt, and so the boys in the neighborhood and I spent most of our time in the woods, digging crawdads up and playing baseball. We cleared a spot back there. And, I other than that, I wasn't involved much with formal things in the village, I would say. A little bit, not much.
Were you a part of any teams when you played baseball, or?
Just a little bit. Who was that? Mr. Palmer dedicated his life to what do they call it? Pee wee baseball. And so I played a little bit, but not. I didn't do much organized sports. But I was on. Mr. Palmer did try and coach me a little bit. He did the best he could do with what he had.
All right. Let's see then. Apart from the pool, did you have any other places in the village that you like to spend time at?
There was a shopping center that was unique to us. We lived, as I recall, 3/4 of a mile away. What you would never see today, as soon as your child was old enough to walk with the older kids, they would just take off and roam the village and go to the shopping center. There wasn't that much traffic in the streets. Even Winton Road that came through there wasn't much traffic on, and so nobody seemed to worry. I believe I was riding my bike to the shopping center, and even my first few years of school, in kindergarten, first grade. I just got them go. Today, you'd never think about putting your kindergartner or first grade and let them get on a bicycle and go and take off. And we'd go down in the woods, and we wouldn't come back till dinner time. it was a different world.
What was your experience in Greenhills schools like?
Well, it probably wasn't so much my feelings as my mom's feelings. And that I flunked the first grade in Greenhills. And she somehow must have attributed that to the school system and sent me off to St. Vivian's, which was, pardon me 1 second, I got it. So I went to the first grade the second time, and the second grade down at St. Vivian's. Then came back to OLR, which was the Catholic school that was just starting when I went into the third grade. I think later my mom must have figured out it wasn't a school system. It was it was her son. I wasn't a very good student. So I wasn't that involved with the schools. All my friends went to school there, but I only went to kindergarten and first grade in the big white building. Right.
So, what sort of people lived in Greenhills?
Wow. You know, as we were growing up, in Greenhills, we grew up in a bubble.
Right.
So it wasn't the real world, although it was the world we knew. So we didn't know there was another world. But in reality, it wasn't like a lot of other places. And so what were the people like? I would say for the most part, they were very family driven and community driven. And then there were certain people inside the community that really stood out, that just dedicated their life. Johnny Baldwin was the police chief, and he knew every child, he knew every family in the village, and he knew every child, and you'd get in a little bit of trouble, and he'd put you in a police car and take you home, and and then mom and dad deal with you. And it really was the village kind of raised you, and I think all the parents felt that was fine, that was appropriate, that's how it's supposed to be, as far as they knew, I would guess. I don't know that existed. Maybe, I'm sure it did in other neighborhoods, but the people, I think, were I think they were great people. I think it was a great community. I don't think you could ever do that again. Society wouldn't let you. At that time it was reverse discrimination, is that you had to be white and you had to have a certain education or skill set to even move in there. So we probably lacked a lot from that. But I would say for what they were attempting to do, I would say they did it. As far as I would know of what they did, or what they were attempting to do. It was a unique place.
Were there any religious differences in the people who lived in Greenhills?
Well, you I don't know that I ever remember coming across a Jewish person. Certainly never came across a Buddhist or a Muslim or anything like that. I would say the place was made up. The Catholic Church was on one corner of Winton Road, and catty corner to that was the Protestant Church, and that was pretty much it, as far as I was aware. And maybe there was other stuff going on I didn't know, but everybody I knew went to one of those two churches.
You mentioned family was very big in Greenhills. Were there any single people who lived there?
Not that I knew. They maybe became single, but in very few of those, I can only think of one that got divorced. To my recollection, I did not know any single people. Doesn't mean they weren't there. Maybe I just didn't know them, because if they didn't have kids, well, what I want to do with them, you know. So not that I know of. I don't know. Yeah, that's an interesting question. I don't know the answer.
Let's see. Were there any differences between what the women and the girls did and what the men and the boys did?
Well, I think I could pretty much just speak for my family. All my sisters were smart, and so they had piano lessons, and they were more involved with school than I was. As my mom said, she didn't know exactly what to do with me, so she thought going to run around the woods was a good thing for me to do. So it was different in that way. We only had one little girl that played. We played a lot of sports from our neighborhood, not from the whole community. So we just made a ball field in the back. And so all the kids in the neighborhood, the boys, we all played baseball and football back there. And then one little girl who could run faster than any of us was the only girl that ever did what we were doing. Other than that, I was oblivious to what girls were doing. They did try and send me to piano lessons. And at the end of the third lesson, the teacher wrote a little note and folded it up and said, "Here, give this to your mother." And I take it home to my mother, and she opens it up, and it says, "Save your money." And that was my last piano lesson. And I could have been a concert pianist, who knows, if they would have gotten me through those first few years, you know.
You mentioned that you spent a lot of time around in the woods. Were there differences between what you did in summer and what you did in winter?
You know, I don't know whether it appeared to me that it snowed a lot more then, because we also lived on a hill. That was all cleared out, and we went sled riding, it seemed to me, pretty often. And we were lucky. I think we had one sled in the family of 5, and other than that, my mom would always get mad, but she had a wash machine, one of those old kinds that had the wringer on it and stuff like that. And anyhow, it had a lid. It was a dome, and it made this perfect saucer. And so I was always taking the dome and going out and going down the hill. And down at the bottom of the hill, there was a sewer culvert over to the side. And you couldn't steer the saucer. And over the hill I went, and into the creek, cracked my head. I think I still got a scar from years ago. Had to go get clamped shut. back then. So I think we spent a lot of time outside, winter and summer. That would be my recollection. Now, I'm sure it was cold at times and we were inside, but I don't remember those times. I remember being outside.
All right then. Let's see. Just kind of bouncing off of that a bit. You mentioned when you cracked your head. Where did your mother take you to the hospital? Or
No. What you did back in those days is you called Dr. Romer. And Dr. Romer came over to the house. I don't know how he did. Or maybe they hauled me up to he had an office up in the shopping center. So he made house calls. So I don't know whether they took me to the house or they took me up. I'm sure I never went to the hospital. I never went to the hospital for anything. So however he did it, Dr. Romer, I'm sure, is the one who did that. He did everything.
He was the only doctor?
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah, and he knew every kid and everything about it. And so you just had quite a few people in the community that were involved with the sports or, the police or the doctor or somebody like that. And, you didn't want to go to the doctor, but every once in a while, Mom fixed you up and off you went. One time I got my hand caught. I was going to make a cake when I was a young kid. And we had an electric mixer, one of the first ones. And I thought the way you cleaned the mixer thing was you run the mixer and then you just take your hand and do it. Well, my hand got caught and it got caught up in the mixer. And they couldn't get it out, so we had to take the mixer up to Dr. Romer with my hand, and he had to get it out. However he did that. Probably still got scars on that, I don't know. Yeah.
Let's see. Right. So what was the relationship between Greenhills and Cincinnati, as far as you can remember?
As far as I would remember, there wasn't any. It was its own bubble. I'd say through grade school, once in a while, probably at Christmas, you get on the bus and go downtown to Shillitoe's. I think Santa Claus was there or something, and I bet you once a year maybe I went to Cincinnati. Maybe my sisters went more. I'm sure my parents went more, but we did our shopping. About the farthest we went was Mount Healthy. There was a clothes store over there, and after you I don't remember how often it was, but I'd say maybe you got one pair of shoes a year, and you would outgrow them, and so halfway through the year you had to cut the toe off the top so your feet could keep going, and then, but in summertime you never wore shoes, never. You took your shoes off at the beginning of summer, and you didn't put them on until the summer was over. You ran everywhere. You ran in the woods. You went everywhere. Back then, I couldn't do it today, but I could walk on the pavement, or I could walk on gravel, or I could walk anywhere, and never think about it. So, never thought about that for a long time.
Did people from Greenhills work in Cincinnati?
Well, of course, very, very few of them worked in Greenhills. My father worked in St. Bernard. He was an engineer, and my mother was a nurse, and she worked in the hospitals. So it wasn't all the way down Cincinnati, but I would call that Cincinnati. It was more of the city. So yeah, most people work somewhere else, and you couldn't go north. There was no Forest Park, or, most people had to go that direction, I guess. I don't know.
See that. While your family was living in Greenhills, what were the politics of Greenhills like?
Well, of course, there were two types of politics. There was the politics of Greenhills, and then there would be the national politics. Is all I would ever hear about. I never heard about Cincinnati politics. I never heard about Hamilton County. I never heard about Ohio. And I had an aunt who had a really loud voice, who was she was a very staunch Democrat. And we're trying to sleep upstairs, and they'd be down in the living room, and her no more Toma voice was really loud, and so I just remember her. That's all I remember about politics, is about her saying whatever, whoever's president at the time or whatever was happening. Other than that, in the village, I don't know that there was that much politics. That's interesting. George Geisen was the mayor. He was the mayor for a long time. I don't remember how long. My best friend's father, I think, became the mayor after that, Chet Hogue. And there was very little that people, to what I ever heard about, people never really challenged them. It was George was the mayor, and that's the way it was. I suspect there was an election, but I never heard anything about it. I don't think there were signs that I recall. It's just George was the mayor. And then there were city councilmen, and it would not be politics. What I was aware of would not be politics as you would know of it today. It did not seem to exist. I don't know why, but it didn't seem to exist. Maybe it did. I didn't know it.
Okay, let's see. Greenhills was originally built based on cooperative principles. How did that really play out in daily life?
Okay, could you pardon me one second? Gail, could you call Cheryl and just tell her to come on up? She may have didn't get my message. Okay, pardon me.
All right.
What was the question again?
The question was, Greenhills was originally built based on cooperative principles. How did that play out in people's lives?
Well, define cooperative in your sense, what you're saying.
Cooperative in a few different senses. It was designed to be a community, for one thing, as opposed to, for example, Levittown, which was built as a suburb but not as a community. And I know when it was built, it was often accused of being a communist or a socialist town. I was wondering how that kind of played out in daily life.
Well, it was interesting because, as you're saying, the grocery store was a co-op, and it was owned by the co-op. Now that did get political when that broke up, But and I believe, for some reason, it seems to me that some farms were involved with that. I know the grocery store was, and I know some of the other stores up there were, and then there was the credit union, which was a co-op. And then, so how did it play out? Well, it played out two ways. So in a sense, you're correct. It was like a communist deal, except you were allowed to have your own job and keep your own money and be successful or not, or whatever. So that wasn't involved. But the other parts of your life were a co-op. Now, how did that play out as far as I knew? Well, it was mostly you had your house. You didn't own your house, back in the beginning. You rented it.
Right.
And the rent was very low. And truthfully, I forget. I don't know how they determined whether the rent was just this kind of house because this much, or whether your income had something to do with that. I don't know. I don't remember that. I know when it's sold, it was just these kind of houses sell for this and these kinds sell for this. But you weren't allowed to do improvements to your house. You weren't, like I said, you weren't allowed to paint your house. You weren't allowed to do anything. And you had to cut the grass. And if you didn't cut your grass, then you got a notice. So it was controlled in that sense. I think once in a while they would rub people wrong. They would tell them to, they had to paint their house, or they had to cut their grass, or they had to do something that every once in a while you would hear that it was they were upset. But the way they generally handled it wasn't too dictatorial, I believe. I think a little bit, but not too. You want to paint your house, and the guy would come inspect it. Did you hurt your eye?
No, I just poked myself a little bit. I'll be fine.
Oh,
Don't worry.
okay. It was interesting. You'd never get away. You'd never get away with any of that today, the way the whole thing was set up. But it was, I would say it was probably set up along some type of socialistic principles. And then when they built it, my grandfather and my uncle were carpenters in the building process. And it was a make work kind of a project. And so later, when we were allowed to work on our house, after we bought our house, which I think was in the early 50s, I'm not sure about that, when it went to private ownership. Then we started working on the house a little bit, and trying to tear that house apart was very interesting. My grandfather was still around, and he'd say, well, we didn't have work. It was in the Depression, and we didn't have work. And so he said, I might have spent all day somewhere just hammering the nails in this one house. And so you went to take the door casing out, and it had 300 nails holding the thing in because he didn't want to run out of work. And so that whole thing was interesting. And then the way they built the houses was interesting. You could tell it was the beginning of people thinking about insulation and energy, because the house was well insulated. have rock wool insulation. The problem was that the building science didn't exist to build houses like that in those days, and they put the vapor barrier on the wrong side of the wall, which caused a lot of structural problems in the houses. I don't know if you're familiar, but there was a section where they tore down a couple of apartment buildings.
I've heard of that, yeah.
And then actually, my daughter's company rebuilt those houses, Potter Hill Homes. And anyhow, our family bought that apartment building back when I was in college. And so we were remodeled, take out windows and stuff, and when we got into the walls, the studs were eaten up from moisture. And so what was holding those walls up is the plaster. That was real plaster on the inside, and that asbestos siding on the outside. It really was holding those one. It was why those houses didn't start falling down. And they found that when they started tearing them down. We found it way earlier than that, but when they tore those buildings down, they found a lot of studs were missing, or so decayed they weren't holding anything up. So
interesting. We heard about the architecture of the houses, but we hadn't heard anything about that before.
Well, the architecture was interesting because in that era, the Depression had its own architecture, and the architecture was to not be ostentatious. It was to be simple and plain, to more reflect. If you look at it, you would say to reflect the economy, because the early 1900s had some spectacular architecture throughout the city, throughout Cincinnati, or the whole country, I'm sure, and all your different ethnicities had their own. Like there was the Italian architecture, and the German, and so there was all this different architecture. But when you got to Greenhills, of course, it was this very simplistic. My belief is that went along with that socialistic approach. But I couldn't tell you enough about architecture, even though I'm a builder, to say that that's what drove that era, or whether it was more a feeling of, well, we can't look like we're rich because we're not, or that kind of thing. So, yeah, it was a very plain, not, in my view, not that attractive of an architecture, but well built. They were gutter downspouts and copper gutters and downspouts, slate roofs. Like I said, all that insulation. Those things were built solid. They had to have spent a lot of money on building those things.
Let's see. Greenhills was originally a planned community. Do you think it was used the way the planners intended?
My view is that I don't know this, but my view would be what they tried to do, because it was the Depression, is to help people get into the middle class, but people who you would say should be the middle class, weren't the middle class, because of the Depression going on. And so they took a group of people who should have been the middle class and made them the middle class, put them in a situation where they could become the middle class. Probably not a bad idea given the times and what was going on. And so you made a lot of jobs building this place, and then you took educated people or people with skills. In other words, you had to be a carpenter or a plumber. You had to have some kind of trade, or you had to have a college degree in order to get a number to move in there. And I would say that worked because I think it became a very middle class community. Back in for what the middle class would have been in the 40s and 50s and even the 60s, it did what it did. Yeah, I'd say if that was what their plan was, I'd say they accomplished that.
You would have been very young during this, but do you have any memories of how World War II or its immediate aftermath affected Greenhills?
Yes, I would be young for that. I do remember some of my first memories were maybe I'm 3 years old and husbands are coming back. They had probably they'd been back for a year, but now they had gone through the war and now they were establishing their families. Probably a good transition place to go from the horrors of a war like that back to civilian life. Again, this was a bubble. And I think it was probably a good transition time. I knew the fathers. They never really talked about the war. They were busy raising a family and doing what they were supposed to be doing. So, no, I would not know. My father had 4 kids by the time the war came along. And he was an engineer, and so I think they called that conscription. In other words, the government took him and put him in a certain job, and they moved him over in Indiana, and he worked in a powder plant, making munitions for the war. I'm too young to know much about the war.
All right then. Let's see. Do you have any memories of how events in the Cold War affected Greenhills?
By that time, we did the drills in school where you got under your desk because you were going to be bombed. We did a few things like that, but other than that, I wouldn't have any recollection of it affecting my life. I was probably too young until Kennedy came along. I was even too young to know what was happening in the world. No, I don't think Greenhills was affected that I knew of.
Let's see. Are there any things you miss about growing up in Greenhills?
Anything I miss about it? Well, the sense of community. They created a sense of community, and you're your friends and the freedom. I would never think today about letting my grandkids go off the way we went off. But there's obviously was a lot of freedom in that. And there was certainly something about self-reliance that, I mean, when I'd say we went into the woods, those woods went for miles. They eventually turned it into Winton Woods that surrounded Greenhills. But before Winton Woods, that was just woods. And we were free to roam it, and we would go long distances for being young. And somehow we were competent, and somehow, obviously, our parents knew that we were competent to do that. You wouldn't think that. You wouldn't, today as a parent or a grandparent, I would not think my kindergartner or my first grader or my second grader was competent enough to go off by themselves somewhere. It's interesting. I wonder if they are, and they were never given the opportunity. We were given the opportunity, and somehow we were.
Let's see. Were there any downsides of growing up in Greenhills?
Not that I was aware of. Now you're saying looking at it from from where I am now. There was almost no diversity. There were no African Americans. I don't remember. There probably were somebody. I don't remember any Asians. I don't remember any African Americans. I don't remember. It was all European descent kind of thing, and it was all white people, and it was all, we were sort of homogenized. People were a lot, even though there were engineers and nurses, there were all these different trades, the people were pretty similar. And so I would say that we missed that diversity. Other than that, I think the bubble was, I think of my grandchildren today. It's like, wow, wouldn't it be neat if you could protect them from the craziness? There's a lot of craziness.
Yeah.
Well, I don't think, if you built the Greenhills today, you couldn't keep that craziness out. You got internet, you got laws that wouldn't let you keep it out, you got internet wouldn't let you keep it out, so you couldn't do it. But in a way, I think it prepared me for later life to go do things that, had I not had that bubble, I probably wouldn't have done. Now, maybe that worked opposite for other people. But for me, I would say it prepared me to go out and do whatever I felt like. I felt like I could do whatever I wanted to do. And, I failed, I succeeded, I did all kinds of things, but at least I did it. I tried it.
All right. On that note, we're just about reaching the end of all the questions that I had. Is there anything you'd like to add that you think we haven't talked about yet?
it it would be neat if Greenhills, and this is why we got involved with trying to start a rebuilding process. It would be neat if you could capture the glory back. There's a lot of decay going on. Pardon me 1 second.
Do you want Cheryl to come up here? Yeah.
Yeah, if she just has it, I'll just sign it.
Okay.
I think we're finished.
Okay. Hey, Cheryl.
So, I don't know. I think I kind of thought, wouldn't it be neat if we could go back and help bring it back into this day and age? And I thought my daughter did a great job with the architecture. It was more of a 20s architecture than a 30s. In a 2010, 2020, a neo-traditional architecture. But it had a lot more character to it. And so I thought that would have been neat. It didn't work too well. The disparity in prices was too great by that time. So that's all I know.
All right. Well, thank you very much.
Okay. All right. Good luck to you guys.